I'm a 25-year-old woman, and my relationship with my older brother, who's 28, has been rocky for as long as I can remember. Growing up, he was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, no matter how much wrong he actually did. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the one who was overlooked and underestimated, especially after the accident. When I was 7, a freak playground accident left me with limited mobility in my right leg. I can walk, but I limp, and anything physically demanding requires extra effort and accommodations. My brother found it hilarious from the start. At first, it was little jabs, like imitating my limp or calling me hop along. I thought he'd grow out of it, but as we got older, his jokes became meaner, sharper. And the worst part, my family always brushed it off as just teasing. My parents, aunts, and uncles would shake their heads and laugh. "Oh, that's just him," they'd say. "Don't let it get to you." I tried ignoring it, but it wore me down. It's hard to stand tall when the people who should have your back make you feel like you're overreacting for being hurt. The most recent family dinner was a perfect example. My brother was in fine form, loudly joking about how I needed special accommodations when our family went hiking last year. He mimicked me asking for help on a trail and exaggerated my limp for laughs. Everyone at the table laughed along, like it was some kind of comedy show. My dad even clapped him on the back like he'd told the joke of the century. I sat there, cheeks burning, pretending the mashed potatoes on my plate were the most fascinating thing in the world. It wasn't the first time, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. But for some reason, that moment stuck with me. Maybe it was the way my mom glanced at me, after laughing, almost like she was daring me to say something. Or maybe it was just the sheer exhaustion of always being the punchline. When I got home that night, I sat in my tiny apartment and let myself stew, not in sadness, but in frustration. I'm not weak. I've built a life for myself. Despite my disability, I've learned to swim, handle DIY projects, and even built a solid career in software development. I've worked hard to create an independent, fulfilling life. And yet, my brother and by extension, my family, couldn't see past my limp. I decided that night that I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. The first thing I did was call my best friend, Olivia. She's been my rock for years, and when I told her what happened, she didn't hold back. "You don't need them to validate you," she said. "Focus on you. Show them what they're missing out on." That's exactly what I decided to do. I started with a project that had been on my mind for a while, modifying my apartment to make it more accessible. My brother had once joked that my place was like an obstacle course for someone with a disability, and while I hated his delivery, he wasn't wrong. I took it as a challenge. I ordered materials online, researched designs, and got to work. Over the next few weeks, I installed custom ramps, reorganized furniture, and even set up an automated door system. It wasn't easy. I had to teach myself a lot of new skills and spent more nights than I'd like to admit covered in sawdust, but the results were worth it. For the first time, my apartment felt truly mine. Around the same time, I had a breakthrough at work. My manager asked me to lead a major project, something I'd been pushing for but didn't think I'd get. The responsibility was huge, but I threw myself into it. When the project wrapped up successfully, I received not just a promotion but a bonus too. It felt like the universe was finally throwing me a bone. Of course, my family noticed something was up. I'd started skipping family dinners, answering texts less, and avoiding my brother entirely. My parents started calling more often, pushing me to let bygones be bygones and talk to him. But I held firm. I wasn't going to engage unless my brother showed genuine change, and so far, all I'd gotten were a few sarcastic texts about why the silent treatment. Classic him. In the meantime, I found a new community. I joined a local adaptive sports group, something Olivia had been urging me to try for ages. The first session was nerve-wracking, but by the end, I'd made friends who actually understood what it felt like to navigate the world with a disability. They weren't just supportive, they were inspiring. I even discovered a knack for wheelchair basketball, something I never thought I'd enjoy but now can't get enough of. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building a life that had nothing to do with my brother or his opinions. I wasn't trying to prove anything to him, I was proving it to myself. And honestly, that felt better than anything else. Update 1. Dentier. Things have been moving fast, but in the best way possible. After finishing the first round of modifications to my apartment, I realized just how much easier my life could be when I had control over my environment. The custom ramps and automated door system weren't just practical, they felt like a statement. For the first time, I was creating a space that worked for me, not against me. Olivia posted a short video of the upgrades on her social media, showing the before and after of the changes. I didn't think much of it until the notifications started rolling in. People were commenting about how innovative the designs were and how they could help others with similar challenges. A few even asked for advice on making their own spaces more accessible. It was surreal, and honestly a little overwhelming. The best part? My brother saw it too. He sent me a text not long after the video went up. It was typical of him, sarcastic and dismissive. Something about how I was milking it for pity points and how people only cared because I was playing the victim. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to let him drag me back into his negativity when I was finally gaining momentum. Meanwhile, things at work were wrapping up on the big project I'd been leading. The deadline was intense, but we pulled it off, and the client was thrilled. My manager called me into their office to thank me personally and let me know I was being promoted. A bonus was also on the table, which meant I could fund the next phase of my apartment updates without dipping into my savings. It felt like all the hard work was finally paying off. Of course, my parents noticed that I hadn't been around much lately. They started calling more often, asking why I wasn't coming to Sunday dinners or why I hadn't replied to my brother's texts. It didn't take long for the guilt tripping to start. They wanted me to be the bigger person and patch things up with him. I told them I wasn't interested in pretending everything was fine, just to keep the peace. If my brother wanted a relationship, he needed to take responsibility for the way he treated me. That didn't sit well with them. They tried to argue, but I kept my voice steady and calm. repeating the same thing. I wasn't engaging with him unless there was genuine accountability. They didn't like it, but for the first time, they didn't push back as hard. Maybe they were starting to see I wasn't the same person who used to sit quietly at the dinner table, letting my brother's words roll over me. Around this time, I started attending weekly meetups for the adaptive sports group Olivia had found for me. I'll admit, I was nervous at first. Most of the people there seemed way more experienced and confident than me, but they were welcoming and encouraging. They showed me the ropes, and before long, I was trying my hand at wheelchair basketball. Turns out I'm pretty good at it, or at least good enough to hold my own in a game. It was a rush, and I started looking forward to every session. The social aspect was just as important as the physical one. I met people who understood what it was like to navigate the world with a disability. They weren't just supportive, they celebrated every win, no matter how small. It felt like a completely different dynamic from what I was used to with my family. One of my new friends from the group saw Olivia's video of my apartment upgrades and suggested I should share more about my journey. I wasn't sure at first, but when a local organization for adaptive living reached out and invited me to speak at an event, I decided to go for it. The event was small but meaningful, and standing up there talking about my experiences felt empowering. People asked thoughtful questions, and a few even came up afterward to thank me for sharing my story. While all of this was happening, my brother stayed true to form. He made a few more snide comments through texts, but they didn't bother me as much anymore. I didn't need his validation, and I certainly wasn't going to let his negativity derail me. One of the most satisfying moments came a few weeks later when I participated in a local 5K adaptive race. It wasn't easy. I had to train for weeks, pushing myself harder than I thought I could. But when I crossed that finish line, I felt unstoppable. I wasn't just proving my brother wrong, I was proving to myself that I could do things he'd always said were impossible. I started cutting back on family visits, which has made a noticeable difference in my mental health. I still talk to my parents occasionally, but I've made it clear that I'm prioritizing myself right now. The distance has been good for me. I'm surrounded by supportive friends and coworkers who see my potential and cheer me on every step of the way. Looking back, I can't believe how much has changed in such a short time. I used to think my brother's opinion mattered, that I needed his approval to feel worthy. Now I see how wrong that was. My progress speaks for itself, and I don't need his validation, or anyone else's, to keep moving forward. Update 2. Things came to a head during a family barbecue my parents hosted. I had been avoiding these gatherings, but my mom begged me to come, promising it would be low-key and just family. Against my better judgment, I agreed. As soon as I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. My brother was holding court, as usual, laughing loudly at his own jokes while my parents hovered nearby, trying to keep the atmosphere light. I stuck to the edges of the group, chatting with a cousin I hadn't seen in a while, but my brother noticed me and made a beeline over. Without warning, he launched into a loud complaint about how I was making everyone uncomfortable by refusing to engage with him. He accused me of playing the victim and causing drama by not letting things go. The whole backyard went quiet. Everyone was staring at us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even flinch. I just told him that setting boundaries wasn't about playing the victim. It was about protecting my peace. The calmness in my tone seemed to catch him off guard. He stammered something about how I was overreacting, but I didn't bite. Instead, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in front of everyone. Later, while I was grabbing a drink in the kitchen, my cousin pulled me aside. She said she was proud of me for standing up to him and admitted that she'd always found his behavior over the top. It was the first time someone in the family had openly acknowledged what I'd been dealing with for years. That small moment of validation meant more than I expected. Meanwhile, work had been going exceptionally well. My boss nominated me for an industry award recognizing innovation in adaptive technology, thanks to the project I'd led. Just being nominated felt like a win, but when the shortlist came out and I saw my name on it, I couldn't stop smiling. The recognition gave me a boost, and it wasn't long before I started seeing more opportunities open up. Of course, my brother couldn't leave it alone. He started making passive-aggressive comments whenever he got the chance. During one group text thread, he joked about how some people were fishing for trophies instead of focusing on what really mattered. It wasn't subtle, and no one else laughed. I didn't respond, but it was clear he was trying to get under my skin. What surprised me was how some of the family started shifting their perspectives. My aunt called to check in on me a few days after the barbecue. She mentioned that she and a few others had been talking and agreed that my brother's behavior had gone too far. It wasn't a full-on family intervention, but it felt like progress. Around this time, I hit a major fitness milestone. I'd been training steadily since the 5K, and I finally managed to complete a personal best in one of the adaptive sports challenges I'd been working on. It was a small win, but it added fuel to the fire. The local newspaper even picked up on my story and published a feature about my advocacy for adaptive living. Seeing my photo in print with a headline that celebrated my achievements was surreal. My brother, predictably, didn't handle it well. He blew up in our family group chat, accusing me of seeking attention and trying to make him look bad. I ignored him, but the rest of the family didn't. A few relatives pushed back, telling him he needed to stop being so bitter and let me have my moment. He stormed out of the conversation, leaving a string of emojis behind like some kind of dramatic exit. As all of this was unfolding, I decided to start therapy. The years of mockery and dismissal had taken their toll, and I wanted to unpack everything in a healthy way. My therapist helped me see how deeply my brother's words had embedded themselves in my self-image. For the first time, I started to let go of the idea that I needed his approval, or anyone else's, to feel worthy. Inspired by this new perspective, I began planning something I'd been too afraid to try for years: a solo trip. I'd always dreamed of traveling alone, but my brother used to mock me for even considering it, saying I wouldn't last a day without help. This time, I didn't ask for anyone's opinion. I started researching destinations and figuring out how to make the trip accessible for my needs. The idea of exploring the world on my own terms felt liberating. Then came the ultimatum. My brother sent a long, rambling text demanding a face-to-face conversation to clear the air. He insisted we couldn't move forward without hashing things out. I told him I was open to a conversation, but only if he was willing to respect my boundaries and approach it with genuine accountability. His response? Radio silence. That silence spoke volumes. It reaffirmed my commitment to putting myself first and refusing to let his negativity dictate my life. As I finalized my travel plans and looked ahead to the opportunities waiting for me, I felt more resolved than ever. My life was no longer about proving him wrong. It was about proving myself right. Update 3. The solo trip had been a dream of mine for years, something I'd never dared to try because of all the doubts planted by my family, especially my brother. After weeks of planning and a lot of second-guessing, I finally finalized my itinerary, a national park renowned for its accessibility and breathtaking trails. I booked an accessible cabin, mapped out transportation, and researched adaptive equipment rentals. Each step felt like progress, chipping away at the idea that I couldn't do this on my own. Olivia was a huge help, offering practical tips on packing, navigating unfamiliar places, and staying safe. She even helped me practice using public transport, something I'd avoided for years because of anxiety about accessibility issues. By the time departure day rolled around, I felt as prepared as I could be. Of course, my parents weren't thrilled. They called me the night before, voicing concerns about me traveling alone. My mom kept repeating things my brother used to say, like how it was too dangerous and how I should wait until I had someone to go with. I reassured them as politely as I could, but I didn't let their doubts stop me. This trip wasn't about them, or him. When the day finally came, I packed my bags, snapped a quick photo for social media, and headed out. The response from my followers, most of whom had started following me after Olivia's video of my apartment upgrades, was overwhelmingly positive. Messages poured in from people cheering me on and wishing me luck. It felt like a small but powerful send-off. The first leg of the journey went smoothly. On the bus to the park, I struck up a conversation with another solo traveler, a woman named Claire, who, like me, had faced her share of challenges. She used a wheelchair and was on her first solo trip as well. We clicked instantly, swapping stories about the obstacles we'd overcome and the goals we had for our trips. By the time we arrived at the park, we'd exchanged numbers and planned to meet up later in the week. Once I settled into my cabin, I set out to explore. I had rented an adaptive trekking pole and a lightweight brace for my leg, which made navigating the trails much easier. On the second day, I tackled a moderately difficult trail I'd been eyeing since my research phase. It wasn't easy, there were steep sections and uneven paths, but I kept going. Reaching the overlook at the end was like standing on top of the world. As I rested there, a park ranger struck up a conversation with me. She was impressed by the effort I'd put in and asked if she could take a photo for the park's social media page. I agreed, not thinking much of it at the time, but the post ended up gaining a lot of traction online. By the time I got back to my cabin, my phone was buzzing with notifications from people commenting on how inspiring the story was. Naturally, my brother couldn't resist chiming in. He sent me a text dripping with sarcasm about my self-promotion, suggesting I was desperate for attention. I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled through the positive comments from strangers and friends alike, letting their encouragement drown out his negativity. On the third day, Claire and I met up again for an easier trail. We ended up spending most of the afternoon talking about our experiences, from the small victories to the bigger struggles. She mentioned that she worked in adaptive technology and invited me to connect with her team when I got back home. The idea of collaborating on something meaningful felt like an unexpected bonus to an already transformative trip. By the time the week was over, I'd accomplished more than I ever thought possible. I navigated an entire day's worth of activities without needing assistance, something my brother had always said I couldn't handle. Each moment, whether it was setting up my gear, conquering a tough incline, or even just enjoying the peace of the wilderness, felt like proof of how far I'd come. On my last evening, I sat by the cabin window, looking out at the sunset. The trip had been about more than proving anything to anyone. It had been about proving it to myself. I didn't need my brother's approval or my parents' reassurance. I was capable, independent, and finally living life on my own terms. When I got home, I shared highlights from the trip with Olivia and a few friends. They were thrilled for me, and even Claire checked in to follow up on our potential collaboration. My parents, on the other hand, were hesitant when I mentioned the trip. I could tell they were holding back their doubts, but I didn't push. This was my journey, not theirs. The best part? For the first time, I didn't feel the need to check my phone for my brother's opinion or anyone else's. This trip had been for me, and that realization was the real milestone. I had officially broken free from the narrative that I needed validation from someone who never believed in me to begin with. Update 4. The family meeting wasn't my idea, but my parents were adamant. They called me one evening, saying it was time for us to sort things out as a family. My first instinct was to say no, but they were persistent. After some back and forth, I agreed to attend on one condition. There would be ground rules. No interruptions, no dismissive comments, and everyone would get a chance to speak. My parents reluctantly agreed, though I could sense my brother wasn't thrilled about the idea. When I arrived at their house, the atmosphere was tense. My brother was slouched on the couch, scrolling through his phone like he couldn't care less. My mom was flitting around nervously, offering snacks and drinks to everyone, while my dad sat quietly in the corner. I took a deep breath and sat down, determined to keep my composure. The meeting started awkwardly. My parents tried to ease into it by talking about how they wanted everyone to get along again. My brother rolled his eyes, muttering that this was all a waste of time, but I stayed calm. When it was my turn to speak, I outlined everything clearly and directly. I explained how his constant mockery over the years had hurt me, using specific examples so there was no room for misunderstanding. I also talked about how the family's tendency to brush off his behavior had made it harder for me to stand up for myself. As I spoke, my brother leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. When I finished, he launched into full denial mode. He claimed he'd never meant anything malicious, that I was too sensitive, and that I should have just laughed it off like everyone else. He even accused me of making up stories to paint him as the bad guy. For the first time, my parents didn't jump to his defense. Instead, my mom looked uncomfortable, and my dad actually spoke up, saying that maybe my brother's jokes had gone too far. My brother's face twisted in anger. He started raising his voice, accusing everyone of ganging up on him. Before anyone could say much else, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. After he left, the mood shifted. My mom looked distraught, but my dad surprised me by apologizing privately. He admitted that he should have stepped in years ago instead of letting things slide. It wasn't a full resolution, but hearing those words felt like a small victory. In the weeks following the meeting, my brother didn't contact me at all. It was almost like he'd decided to punish me with silence, but honestly, I didn't mind. I threw myself into therapy, focusing on rebuilding my self-worth and reinforcing the boundaries I'd set. Each session felt like peeling back another layer of the self-doubt I'd carried for so long. Meanwhile, my collaboration with Claire, the fellow traveler I'd met on my solo trip, was taking off. Her team was working on an innovative adaptive technology project, and they invited me to join as a consultant. The work was challenging but rewarding, and it felt amazing to contribute to something that could make a real difference in people's lives. Around the same time, I was invited to speak at a local school about living with disabilities and overcoming challenges. The students were engaged and asked thoughtful questions, which reminded me of why advocacy had become such a big part of my life. It wasn't just about my journey, it was about helping others see what was possible. Not everyone in the family was supportive, though. A few extended relatives started murmuring that I was overreacting and making a big deal out of nothing. One even told me I should just let it go for the sake of family harmony. I didn't argue. I simply told them I was done sacrificing my peace to keep the family comfortable. Despite the lingering tension, I felt more at peace than I had in years. My life was moving forward in ways I never imagined. Work was fulfilling, my social circle was stronger than ever, and the weight of seeking my brother's approval was finally gone. The family may have been divided, but for the first time I felt whole. I wasn't living for anyone else's expectations, I was living authentically, and that was enough. Update 5. A few weeks after the family meeting, I received a long, unexpected text from my brother. It was his version of an apology, though it felt more like an attempt to save face. He acknowledged that he might have taken things too far but quickly shifted to blaming our parents for not stepping in earlier. He ended the message with a line about how he hoped we could move on and put this behind us. I took my time replying. When I finally responded, I was clear reconciliation would require more than vague apologies. I told him I needed to see genuine accountability and long-term change, not just words. His response? Silence. Around the same time, things at work hit an all-time high. The project I'd been consulting on with Claire's team was not only a success but also earned me an industry accolade for my contributions to adaptive technology. The award ceremony was surreal. Standing on stage, I felt proud of the work we'd done, knowing it could make a real difference in people's lives. Not long after, I was invited to deliver a keynote speech at a major event on accessibility and innovation. The audience was larger than I'd ever imagined, and as I wrapped up my talk, the standing ovation caught me completely off guard. The recognition was overwhelming in the best way. The moment wasn't without its challenges, though. My brother caught wind of the speech through a family group chat where my parents had proudly shared the news. He made a snide remark about me enjoying the spotlight and joked about how he'd have to take up a new hobby to keep up. This time, no one laughed. My parents didn't respond to his comments, and the silence from the rest of the family spoke volumes. Privately, my parents reached out to express their pride. They told me they were impressed by how far I'd come and assured me they supported the boundaries I'd set with my brother. It felt like a shift, a small but significant step toward realigning the family dynamic. Meanwhile, Claire and I had been staying in touch. What started as a casual friendship grew deeper as we collaborated on more projects and shared stories about our personal lives. She became someone I could rely on, and our bond felt like one of the most natural parts of my journey. The recognition from my speech and the award didn't stop there. A community magazine reached out to feature me in a profile about local advocates making a difference. The article highlighted not just my professional achievements, but also my advocacy work and personal story. Seeing my journey laid out like that was a moment of reflection. It showed me just how far I'd come. Amid all this, my brother made another awkward attempt at reconciliation. He sent me a message asking if I wanted to grab a coffee and catch up. The invitation felt half-hearted, like he was checking a box rather than genuinely trying to mend things. I declined, citing a busy schedule. I didn't shut the door completely, but I made it clear that rebuilding trust would take time and consistent effort. Setting those boundaries wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I wasn't angry with him anymore, just focused on protecting my peace. Therapy had helped me understand that forgiveness didn't mean tolerating toxic behavior, and I was finally putting that lesson into practice. My parents also started making changes. They began attending family therapy sessions, something I never thought I'd see. They told me they wanted to better support both of their children and address the enabling behaviors that had caused so much tension over the years. Knowing they were making an effort gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. The final victory came in the form of a challenge I'd been preparing for, a grueling adaptive marathon. It was something my brother had once mocked as impossible, but I'd trained for months, determined to prove him and myself wrong. The race was tough, pushing me to my limits, but crossing the finish line was worth every moment of effort. The crowd's cheers and the feeling of accomplishment were unlike anything I'd experienced before. The marathon finish even caught the attention of the local news, which featured me in a segment about overcoming obstacles. Messages of support poured in from friends, coworkers, and even strangers who had followed my journey. As I looked back on everything, my brother's comments, the family meeting, the milestones I'd achieved, I realized something important. I didn't need his validation or approval anymore. My strength, my achievements, and my peace came from within, not from anyone else's opinions. For the first time, I felt completely free. My journey wasn't about proving my brother wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of anything. And I had.